Find more great shows or join the team at sport-social.co.uk.
Hello, welcome to a very, very special edition of the Masterclass. I'm your host, Haider Rubbani. As always, I'm joined by Karan Tejwani, who is the writer of Wings of Change, a massive expert on the Red Bull model and project, which has been so fantastic in the past 10 years. He's an expert on Ralf Rangnick. I'm delighted to invite you on the podcast, Karan. How are you and how excited are you about the prospect of Ralf Rangnick in the Premier League at a really, really big club in Manchester United?
Yeah, thank you for having me on here. It's always good to talk about Red Bull and Ralf Rangnick. And, it was a bit of a surprise when the news came out that Rangnick would be very close to signing for United. It was the speed of it was quite surprising. I didn't think that United would actually pull it off. But, here you are, and it should be a bit of a ride. It's always very fun to have Rangnick working in football. And this is undoubtedly the biggest job he's taken on in his career, which is weird to say for a person who's been in football for so long, who's 63 years old now. So it's going to be fun. I don't think a lot of people, especially in England, especially close to English football, know much about him. But they've seen bits of what he does through people like Thomas Tuchel, Nagelsmann, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very fun. I'm someone that's followed him quite closely since 2019. He was linked with the Manchester United job when Solskjaer got made interim. That didn't materialize. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because he's a manager who isn't necessarily someone that's won a lot of big trophies. And that's something I want to start with, just to maybe alleviate some of the Manchester United fans who are a bit concerned about that. But it's about the philosophy. He's a teacher, isn't he? He's all about teaching and sharing that knowledge and ensuring that we, quick transitional football, counter-pressing, high energy, win the ball back quickly. Verticality is very, very important. So what would you say to some United fans who are a little bit concerned about the fact that his CV isn't, similar to some of the top managers in world football?
I think it's a fair concern for many people to have. I think that, people want to be appealed to by a manager or a player's success in the past. Nobody likes to see a person come in who's not had a big CV. But while I say that, it's also important to mention that football is not just about the trophies, and for Ralf Rangnick, it's certainly not the case. He's probably the most influential person in modern German football, at least one of the most influential people in modern German football. What he's done for the game in Germany, for coaches there, people like, as I mentioned earlier, Julian Nagelsmann, Thomas Tuchel, Marco Rose, coaches now who are working at top clubs like Bayern, Dortmund, Chelsea. The most recent Champions League winner is a Ralf Rangnick disciple. So that sort of thing is almost an invaluable piece of history to have in the game and an invaluable legacy to have in the game. In the past, right, he was from the 90s, he was a bit of a revolutionary in German football with his persistence with the back four at the time where the sweeper system was the most popular thing in Germany. When they won the World Cup in 1990 and they had the sweeper, even back from the 70s, he decided he wanted to change things, and in time it was proven that he was right, because the German national team had a quick downfall immediately after winning that World Cup. So at a time where everyone was against his ideas, he persisted with his own ideas, and he was quite successful. And now all the top coaches in the world have some version of his football and enjoying their success with it. So he has a bit of an invaluable legacy in German football, and it's good to have at United.
Let's start, Karan, with Rangnick's career. So you've mentioned a little bit, obviously he is someone who's got a wealth of experience, but we really saw that at Hoffenheim, didn't he? Where tiny village in Germany. I mean, I read the fantastic article by Raphael Honigstein on The Athletic about him, just to get a bit more background on Rangnick, because I didn't know actually sort of the early days of his career. But what he did at Hoffenheim to make them what they are today, because they're quite an established club in German football. They obviously play Champions League football as well, was fantastic. So let's talk about that sort of era, and what did he do for Hoffenheim to elevate them onto the world stage?
His work with Hoffenheim is quite unique. I think that as you mentioned, it was a village club. They were owned by a billionaire in Dietmar Hopp, and I don't want to take away the success from other clubs who focus on natural resources, on resources of their own. But Hoffenheim were a club heavily funded by a billionaire, which is very uncommon in German football, in Dietmar Hopp. And he was eager to see his own local team, Hoffenheim, go from the bottom tiers of German football to the very top, which is what they achieved eventually. And Rangnick joined them when they were in the third division, and in time, very quickly, they went to the first division, which is the Bundesliga. And it was a successful tenure for him, mainly because he had the keys to do whatever he wanted. Now, Rangnick himself is a very demanding person when he works at the club, which is one of the reasons that I was a bit of a surprise that United got him. But he's very demanding. He wants control even over the smallest things at the club, which could be as little as, how we travel to away games, or what we eat on the coach, or how we or what activities we do before the game. It's not just what happens on the pitch or what happens in training. It has to be in the smallest things, like living or what hotel you're living in or what you're doing. So he wants to have control over those little things and understand what the team's doing and make the team and tailor the team to his needs. So at Hoffenheim, he had the freedom to do that. And with the free investment that was given to him by his owner, his boss, the owner of the club, he got that. And his main idea at Hoffenheim was to have young players coming through. He wanted to have players under the age of 23, and he wanted to be successful with them. And he also had a strong scouting system, mainly in Brazil. And he bought a lot of Brazilian talent. The most popular one was probably Luis Gustavo, who eventually ended up playing for Bayern Munich. So that happened, and then he joined when they were in the third season, and they had successful promotions, and they ended up in the Bundesliga in 2008. And by Christmas, in their first ever Bundesliga season, they were top of the league. So it was quite a big deal, and they were competing with Bayern Munich. And I mentioned this on my Twitter feed the other day. One of the most entertaining Bundesliga games in recent years has been between Hoffenheim and Bayern Munich, and Bayern won that, but it was still a treat for the eyes because of the speed at which the game was played at. Local newspapers called for it to be in the German FA coaching course. They wanted their future football to be played like this, and they wanted coaches to be inspired like this. Raphael Honigstein himself said it was Autobahn football, which was the most popular German highway, and the speed at which it was played at was very impressive. If you watch that game back, it's really enthralling. Sadly for Rangnick, that stint ended quite sourly because of that control being taken away from him. Luis Gustavo once again was sold without his knowledge and ended up leaving some feuds. But to conclude, his work at Hoffenheim was incredibly popular, and he made Hoffenheim what they are today, which is an established Bundesliga club. How he did that was with unique training methods. He employed coaches from other sports. He had a strong level of sports psychologists to understand the mentality of players. He employed ice hockey coaches because he felt ice hockey and football had transferable skills. So it's a lot of those little things that made his players better and make those young players hungrier for more success.
It's absolutely fascinating. I did read that in Honigstein's article where he was saying that he looked at other sports and he was like, why is football so far behind? I think was it a volleyball? I might be incorrect here, but there was a sport where they were training, maybe like 10 hours a day. Football, you're going in, training a couple of hours, coming back. And he's just pulling all these ideas. I mean, look, he's a thinker, isn't he? He's an intellect. He's all about the sports science, the numbers. It's what Manchester United need right now, don't they? For the last decade or so, it's been haphazard, not footballing decisions, lack of plan, lack of modernization. I think that's something that Rangnick will bring. We'll sort of skip over Schalke. He did well at Schalke, but let's talk about the Red Bull model. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we do that, guys, so make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, give Karan a follow as well on Twitter. We'll drop his @handle and his details in the description below because he's a great person to follow with great insight. Let's talk about that Red Bull model. I'm going to bring up a screen grab here. If you're listening to this on Spotify, we have an excerpt from Karan's book, which is a fantastic book. You guys should definitely read it, and we'll put the link in below as well. But let's talk about this. So let's start with the Red Bull model. They're almost branching out to every single sport, aren't they? They're in Formula One, and whichever sport they go into, they seem to have success. I mean, it's quite staggering. So let's talk about the Red Bull model. What is it, and could we see a similar sort of model brought into Manchester United? I know Manchester United is a massive, massive club, but they do need some sort of structure in place, don't they, to elevate them to future success?
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. I think that Manchester United for a long time have not been a football club. And, when Solskjaer was sacked. I think it's another sacking. It's another similar cycle where everyone sort of gets tired of the old manager. The players, I don't know what happened there, but the players seem like they lost interest. Lots of stories came out that Bruno Fernandes said he wasn't able to understand concepts or whatever was going on. It felt like the same old cycle. Similar things happened with Mourinho, with Van Gaal, with David Moyes, and happened against Solskjaer. But the important part now is for Manchester United to become a football club once again and not just focus on what happens off the pitch. It's going to be controversial to say, but I think Ed Woodward's done a good job in terms of what he's done from the commercial side, in terms of the sponsorships. But let's face it, he's not a football man. He's not a football person at all. He's a perfect person for the owners who want to milk out money, but he's not the perfect person for the football side of things. And we've seen that over the last 8 or 9 years. But Ralf Rangnick is that football man, and having him in will change that football structure. Now, about Red Bull is a more turbocharged version of Hoffenheim. He had the same level of control that he did at Hoffenheim. He had the same amount of financial freedom. He had the same amount of influence in his decisions. He could basically do whatever he wanted yet again. And this was a bigger operation because he was managing on different scales, because he had 4 clubs to manage. He had Red Bull Salzburg in Austria, RB Leipzig in Germany, New York Red Bulls in the United States, and ultimately Red Bull Brazil, which is now a different operation. So he had 4 clubs, 4 different countries, and he managed to put out a similar philosophy for everyone, which was to have younger players coming through, so players between the age of 18 and 23. He wanted to play attacking vertical football with a high press, which is what we've seen famous Red Bull teams do. And he wanted to have a network of coaches and scouts coming through who had the similar philosophy and ideology to him, which is why so many young coaches have come through under his guidance. Now, the screen grab you see on the screen is not from my own work, but it's from the International Trainer Conference from 2017, where Ralf Rangnick spoke, and he spoke about why he prefers to have younger players over older players. And you can see a lot of the reasoning is very logical and very simple. Younger players have less injury history than older players. Younger players have more motivational differences than older ones. Younger ones want to make their name in the game, and older ones want to protect their reputation, so they will have more hunger to grow in the game. Younger players have less riding on their shoulders, and then certainly at the time they did, and they have a greater potential for market value enhancement, which is that they can be sold for higher fees. Now, this is mainly designed for the Red Bull model, because RB Leipzig or Salzburg aren't as big clubs as Manchester United, so they have to sell players in order to go to the next stage. But for Manchester United, it's different, because United are a big club and they've never historically been a selling club. As we've seen recently with Dan James, his sale was one of the biggest sales in United's history. So United, they can develop those players, which is what they've been very good at historically. And bringing in that additional mind like Ralf Rangnick, who has this incredible history of developing young players and coaches, will be a massive benefit for the club and academy. And because they don't have to sell those players in the future, because they aren't a selling club by nature, they can keep these players for the long run and become the superpower that they're ideally meant to be. So in that respect, there are lots of similarities between Red Bull and United from a youth perspective, and the main difference will be that United can finally keep these players for the long run.
Something I'm going to kind of throw a bit of a spanner in the works here, because we need to bring in the Glazers into this, because the Glazers, any Manchester United fan doesn't need to be told about the damage that the Glazers have done to the club. I really like the idea of signing young players. So I've got sort of a 2-part question. First, will Rangnick be given the authority to go and get these less marketable players? And I'm saying it like that because shirt sales or something, commerciality, the non-footballing side of Manchester United is what the Glazers really care about, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. Is there a concern that Rangnick might not be able to bring those players in because they won't sell the shirts that a Ronaldo would sell, or a Paul Pogba? And the second point is, aren't the Glazers sitting there rubbing their hands, Karan, very, very happy at the idea that, we're going to get a lot of really talented young players and we're going to sell them for huge, huge amounts? Isn't that a bit of a concern, or a legitimate concern to have as a Manchester United fan when you hear this?
I think it's fair to have that. I think that, United, Ralf Rangnick, I don't think he would have taken the job if he didn't know that, if he knew that he wouldn't be able to sign these young players as he has. He's very intent on getting what he wants. And I think that he would have wanted some assurance that he can get these players in regardless of how marketable they are or how not marketable they are. I think that there will be a mixture of getting in these relatively unknown players from different leagues and mixing them up with signings of the caliber that we've known United bring in. So they're bringing these popular players and mix them up with these young players that we rarely know of. And I think that's how it's going to work in the long term. I think that's how I see it happening, at least. That's just my personal opinion. But in a way, you could also see the Glazers or United hierarchy rubbing their hands and being excited that these players will come to the club and become big in the future, and hopefully they can try to make some money out of them. It's hard to judge at this point, but I think the first 7-8 months or until the end of the interim period, we'll know more about it. I think that there's already a good squad in place, which is fairly young. They've had players like Rashford and Sancho, and even Bruno Fernandes is still fairly of the right age in the prime of his career. So there doesn't need to be a drastic reduction of the age of the squad. I think the only major concern would be the forward line, where Cavani and Ronaldo are there, who seem like, or at least Ronaldo seems like at least a very un-Rangnick player. So that would be one of the bigger concerns. But I think that the squad right now is fine enough, and they just need a few more players to complement them, especially in midfield, perhaps even in defence, to sort of build the ideal team.
I want to talk about the academy as well. I want to talk about the academy structure within the Red Bull model. And I kind of want to link it to Manchester United, because Manchester United have put a lot of money and a lot of investment and a lot of revamp into the academy. And it's actually probably one of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I'm going to say Nicky Butt as well was so instrumental in this. He's gone now. It was one of the big successes, I'd say, over the last 5 years for Manchester United. You're seeing some really talented Hannibal Mejbris there. You've got some really talented young players coming through. Let's talk about the academy. What did the Red Bull model do in terms of the academy? They must have invested heavily into the academy. Is the academy seen then as the real sort of hub for Rangnick when it comes to talent?
It is, and it was one of the successes of the Red Bull model, as you mentioned. Not particularly in Leipzig, but at least in New York and Salzburg, they had a very structured academy system. In Salzburg, they spent about 400 million euros on building a brand new academy. It's very modern, very state of the art. If you look at the pictures of it, it's very visually appealing. Based near a couple of mountains of the mountains in the area. It's built to look at from the outside and the inside. The facilities are very modern as well, and that's one of the successes. And we've been able to see why so many young players have been able to go through their model and be so successful in the future. And I'm not just talking about players who've come through locally, but players from abroad as well. You think of people like Sadio Mane, Minamino, both whom are Liverpool now, Naby Keita, even Erling Haaland, who played at Salzburg for a while. All these players came in from abroad, got the perfect Red Bull training, learned from these Rangnick and Red Bull ways, and became the players they are now. And that's one of the successes. At Leipzig, there's a bit of a concern because there was at least no clear pathway to the first team, because the first team was so complicated and convoluted, and there's little path to sort of break through the first team. They've changed that now in recent times, and they've been able to bring in more players from the academy to the first team. But from Salzburg and New York, they had a very clear structure, and that worked out. And similarly at United, it's as you mentioned, it was rightly one of Solskjaer's successes that while he was there, he did streamline the academy process, and more players got a chance to at least be a part of the first team, if not be consistent first team players. So that could work out quite well. And as the picture here says, he has a formula for these young players and how they can improve. And a lot of it revolves around mentality. So it has to be a combination of your natural born talent and acquired skill, which natural born talent is what you have since birth, since you were a very young player. Acquired skill is what can be drilled into you in a way, how you can be coached, how you acquire new concepts. And that has to be multiplied by your mentality, which is your own state of mind. And that results in your total competence as a footballer. So I'll give you a good example. Yusuf Poulsen, when he signed, Ralf Rangnick gave him a 5 for natural born talent. So he wasn't the most talented footballer, very mid-range. His acquired skill was what he was taught, which he gave him a 6 for. So that adds up to 11. And his mentality was given a perfect 10. So it adds up to 110, which was one of the higher rankings he gave for a footballer. So even if you watch Yusuf Poulsen now, he probably isn't the most attractive footballer to watch. He probably isn't the most talked about players in football, but every coach he's had at Leipzig loves to have him in the squad, regardless of his deficiencies as a footballer. When you think of Nagelsmann, Rangnick, Hasenhüttl, all very good coaches, all of them gave Poulsen an integral first team first team role because of how he was in terms of his desire to become good and desire to play for the team. And that's the sort of player Rangnick demands at United. I think that, they have players who may not be the best on the ball or off the ball, but they have players who give it their all for the team. So you think of names like Fred, McTominay, Victor Lindelof, may not be favourites amongst the fans, but I can see a place for them under Ralf Rangnick.
Let's talk about that actually before we talk about Rangnick's sort of influence. Let's talk about a couple of players who would have a place. I said earlier, Fred definitely I can see, especially with his ability to be very effective, I think, in the counter press. McTominay is an interesting one. I don't see a lot of vertical passes from him, but that's something that probably could be coached. Lindelof is one player that I thought who would definitely be in Rangnick's size, just because of the fact that his ability on the ball is very, very good. He is probably got deficiencies under aerial balls, physical duels. Are there any other players that you're looking at? I think Bruno Fernandes could really, really benefit. He needs some more formal. I'm going to say formal, coaching in terms of structure. His ability in a defined system we've seen under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I mean, I don't know if it's with the free role he was given, but he's not very disciplined. So that's something I do want to see. What about Donny van der Beek as well? Do you expect him to be a player who could thrive in this system? And then Jadon Sancho, we know Rangnick is a huge, huge fan. So are there any other players that I've mentioned that you want to expand on? Or are there any other players that could possibly find themselves in contention for starting spots under Rangnick?
No, you mentioned all the big ones. I think Bruno Fernandes and Fred will be almost... They're expected to have very good roles in the squad. I think they have the right energy and right desire for the team. Fred, if you watch his performances for Brazil, he's on most games one of their better players in midfield. Very energetic, very demanding off the ball, and willing to do the dirty work off the ball. So I think that could be quite handy for a Ralf Rangnick team, and same for Bruno Fernandes as well. And Sancho, you mentioned, Rangnick did admit that he was a fan of him since he was at City, and he wanted to bring him to Leipzig, but he chose Dortmund instead. So I imagine that he would be one of the first names whenever he's fit on the team sheet. Even Rashford, in terms of the energy he brings to the team and his willingness to press, he would be a strong member of the first team as well. You mentioned I should bring in Harry Maguire. I think his leadership qualities are quite. I don't want to say doubted, but
weak.
Yeah, I think lots of people don't seem to recognize the impact he has on the team when he's not there. He may not be the best defender in the world or the best defender on the team even, but he does have a certain quality to be more progressive and carry the ball forward and show some leadership in that regard. So I think that he would be quite important, at least in this interim period, while Rangnick is there. So there are a few players that would thrive that I really didn't under Solskjaer, especially in the final months. Van der Beek, it's hard to say. He has the right qualities, but it's a difficult one to talk about every time because he's been at the club for almost 15 months now, and he's not had the chances to show his best talents. And when he does, it's hard to show the perfect match rhythm when you play only once every 5 games or play 10 or 15 minutes every game. It's just difficult to judge a player of his quality. But I actually showed the right quality, especially in the Champions League season where they reached the semi-final. His intelligence with his runs, his intelligence when he's not with the ball, and his desire to press. I think that would be quite handy under Rangnick.
Absolutely. Any players that could possibly find it a struggle? I think you could probably look at Luke Shaw, obviously you saw the clip going around of Rangnick saying that Manchester United need a left back. That was in 2020. It's before Shaw's upturn in form. Is he someone you could possibly see struggling under this system? Martial, I think, is another one, not the most industrious without the ball. Aaron Wan-Bissaka is a player possibly as well. Are there any? Well, let's ignore Ronaldo because everyone knows that there is that kind of mismatch between Rangnick and Ronaldo. But you never know because Rangnick's smart enough to find a solution which Ole Gunnar Solskjaer couldn't do when Ronaldo came into the side in terms of the lack of off-the-ball work. But is there any other players that you think possibly will maybe struggle to adjust?
I think the Luke Shaw thing is as you mentioned, it was back in 2020, and he said it at a time where I think he said it around the time when they lost 6-1 to Spurs, and Shaw had probably one of the worst games in the United shirt for him the last 6 or 7 years. So I think since then, and that Spurs game was a turning point for Shaw. His form changed after that because they got in Tellez, and whatever the reasons were, whether it was fitness that improved or his the coaching around him improved, or he just had a greater desire to be the best player he could be. He's been a different player since for club and country, and even though this season hasn't been the best start for him, I think he can bring it back quite easily because he's that good. So I don't think that's an issue for Shaw, and especially if Rangnick shifts to a back three or back five, how you look at it, he plays with wing backs. I think that Shaw would find it quite useful for himself. So I don't think there's much to worry about Shaw. And Saka, perhaps on the ball, he may not be the best, but I still think defensively, at least, he's a very useful player. I think that he won't have any issues as well. I think that he could, at least for the interim period, be a part of that first team quite consistently. And I don't think the replacements in the team, whether it's Diego Dallo, I don't think they're quite as good as Wan-Bissaka would be. So I think he's fine too. As for Ronaldo, that's obviously been the big issue since the Rangnick news came out. You can't doubt Ronaldo as a footballer, great goal scorer. You don't score 700 or 800 career goals if you're an average footballer. So, but the issue does come around where his off the ball work is a bit of a concern. This was written in the Guardian a couple of days ago where it was mentioned that Ronaldo solves the problem that Ronaldo creates, and he is that sort of player. He can turn a game in an instant. Whether Rangnick builds a team around him to sort of accommodate for his lack of pressing or his lack of off the ball effort is to be seen. But I think that he will be integrated, at least in this interim period, and maybe he won't be given a long-term contract after the season, or he will last his career at United or his contract at United before moving on. So I can't see him being here beyond his contract, but I can see him being used in the squad under Rangnick and the team being made around him, where the 10 players other than him do his job and try to accommodate for his lack of presence off the ball. But yeah, a couple of other players, Martial, definitely, I can't see a future for him anymore. He's been off the mark for almost 2 seasons now. He had that one period during lockdown where he was scoring goals in a constant, but that dried off, and he is just, it's hard to judge with how his mentality is in the game. He just doesn't seem to want to make an effort. So he could be off. Perhaps it could be the end for Nemanja Matic as well. Maybe even at the back, we could see a swap between Henderson and De Gea. And obviously De Gea's been great this season, but maybe give Henderson more of a chance.
So I want to talk about the system that you can see Manchester United using. I can see the 4-2-2-2 fitting quite nicely with the current squad. And Man United have got talent in their squad where they could probably play the 4-4-2 diamond. They could play the 4-2-3 probably as well. They haven't got that established defensive midfielder. But where does Paul Pogba fit into this as well? Let's say they play 4-2-2-2. Where would Paul Pogba fit? Because a lot of people have made a lot of things. I'm a big Paul Pogba fan. I'm at the stage now where probably he's going to leave in the summer, and maybe that's the best thing for him, the club, and everyone involved. I think he's supremely talented. I still think he's an asset, but there are concerns that in terms of, I'm not sure how he would work in that counter press. He's not the best at that. So yeah, what formation do you see Manchester United using, and does Paul Pogba have a place in that starting lineup?
It's hard to judge with Pogba. I personally don't think he's going to be mightily useful under Rangnick. I think that the injury sort of helps Rangnick in a way. You mentioned rightly, he's a great footballer, perhaps the best midfielder at the club, one of the best players at the club even. And he's definitely a goal standard midfielder when he's at his best. And I too am at the stage where I feel that it's his last few months at United. I know he says every year, but I do feel it's his last few months at United, and he'll be gone at the end of his contract. But I think the 4-3-3 works best. It makes the best use of the squad profile in terms of the wingers they have. There's Rashford, Sancho, Ahmad below them. Even if you want to include Martial as a winger, but it makes the best out of the talent they have. It gives the midfielders the freedom to do what they want. Even Bruno, he's played his best football in that role, but he has that sort of expression to do whatever he wants in the middle of midfield. So I think that works best with the entire squad profile. We know Rangnick has been quite popular with the 4-2-2-2, especially at Leipzig. But even in his 2018-2019 season, he used a back five quite often, and that was when there was more defensive solidity. In the previous season on Hasenhüttl, they conceded 74 goals, I think it was, and in the next season where they focused more on counter pressing and keeping the ball and counter pressing and sort of being a more solid side in defense. That number almost halved to around 45. So He focuses on that sort of thing quite often. And I think that the 4-3-3 would bring that level to the team more often. I think, as you mentioned, the likes of Fred and all we included in the squad. I think that there isn't a permanent place for Pogba in the team, and the injury is a bit of a blessing in disguise for Rangnick himself, because he doesn't have that stress of having to include the player in the squad.
Karan, let's finish off now with sort of the succession plan. So Rangnick will be a 6-month interim. We're seeing that he would possibly like to take the job full time. I think United should do the 6 months and then bring in a manager after that. Let him have a huge say in who he brings in as well, and move him upstairs. He's going in a 2-year consultancy role. They're saying it's going to be a sporting director role. Hopefully he'll have the influence. But there's two managers, obviously, that are very, very heavily linked to Manchester United. Mauricio Pochettino, who is the lead, the front runner in this, and then Erik Ten Hag as well. You're seeing a lot of reports actually coming out today regarding Erik Ten Hag that the club really like him, and Ajax won't stand in the way of Ten Hag if he wants to move from Manchester United. So based on those two, I really like Pochettino. I would be delighted with either of them. Which manager do you think is a better fit in terms of succession? And there's one name that keeps on coming up consistently with a couple of the listeners, and they want me to ask you this today. So I'm going to ask you, Ralf Hasenhüttl, someone I actually really like. I think he's a fantastic manager, done a really good job at Southampton. Again, they play a 4-2-2-2. But which manager do you think would be the best fit post Rangnick? And I think it'll be one of Pochettino or Ten Hag.
I think that Rangnick, as you mentioned, he shouldn't be a long-term. He probably wouldn't want to be a long-term manager at the club too, because he's not been very eager to manage teams over the last 7-8 years. He's only taken on 2 jobs in terms of management. That's both of them with Leipzig. One in 2015-16, where he got them promoted to the Bundesliga, and one in 2018-19, where he was sort of the transition manager between Ralf Hasenhüttl and Julian Nagelsmann. So he doesn't really like, per se, coaching, and he likes to see the club or the team from above the head coach role. So I think he would be here for the rest of the interim period before moving on to the sporting director role that United desperately need. And that would be the best thing for all parties. I think that the team and the club would benefit massively from that, because they've lacked a pure footballing presence above the head coach in recent times. So, that would work best. And in terms of the next coach, I think Pochettino seems like the more logical choice, purely because of his more Premier League experience and his experience of working with these sort of teams and players. Obviously, Ten Hag, a very good coach himself, a very good tactician, a very shrewd, smart, calculated manager. And we've seen that with this Ajax team. I think this Ajax team can go very far, provided he's here for a long time. If he's here for the rest of the season, I think they can do quite well in the Champions League as well. I'm expecting at least a quarterfinal run, and beyond that, perhaps it's down to the luck of the draw. But in terms of getting in Ten Hag, I think there would be a clash of ideologies, where you would have the German gegenpressing style of Ralf Rangnick and his own counter-pressing thing, and there would be a clash with the Cruyffianism of Ten Hag and Ajax, or the Ajax way that Ten Hag's been known to promote. Obviously, there are a few similarities between them too, but there would be a bit of a clash between them. I don't know how that's going to work. Obviously, with Pochettino as well, there's a similar line, but I would say Pochettino is more relaxed in his way, a bit more different, and I think that would suit more. So I think in my head the ideal scenario would be that Rangnick does the 6 months, goes upstairs to work from the sporting director role, and gets in Pochettino next year. And I imagine that Pochettino would want to move as well, because we've seen the stories in the past where he wants to move to England, his family lives here, and I imagine he likes the Premier League more than Liga, because PSG as a club, they may have the best talent in the world, but they don't seem like the most comfortable place, because every coach leaves in the same way, where they say there's too many stars, there's too much to manage beyond just the team. So I think that Pochettino doesn't seem very comfortable in that area, so he would want to take that role himself. And with Ajax and Ten Hag, obviously Ajax are a more free club. If people want to leave, they don't hold them to their contract. We've seen that in the past with Justin Kluivert, Brian Brobby, the young players who wanted to go. And I imagine they would do the same with Ten Hag as well, that if he says he wants to go, they'll give him a free pass. But I imagine Pochettino would be the ideal scenario. And as for Hasenhüttl, a very popular name with Rangnick. He sort of gave him his big break in German football, and he hired him from Aachen, I think it was. And Hasenhüttl is a very popular Rangnick disciple, but I don't think that towards the end of his Leipzig tenure, there was a bit of a clash in ideologies again, where Hasenhüttl wanted to focus more on possession football and Rangnick wanted to promote his gegenpressing, his counter-pressing styles. So there was a bit of a clash in that football, and Hasenhüttl himself isn't. I don't think he's a very popular name in English football himself. He's done good work with Southampton, but everyone that talks about Southampton under Hasenhüttl thinks of those 2 9-0 losses, and even though they happened a long time ago, and it's hard to put down all his work down to 2 results, it's a big stain on his reputation. And he has a long-term contract at Southampton. I think there's 4 years left on it, and I imagine after this, wherever he goes, it would be more likely Germany than England.
I agree with that. And my sort of last point before we wrap up on Pochettino, I agree with the clash of ideologies. A lot of people do think that Ten Hag would be the more logical fit, but actually Ten Hag loves possession-based football. And I think Pochettino is more happy to play more transitional football than, he's happy to give up possession. And that's why I think, not that Man United won't dominate possession under Rangnick, but there is going to be, the focus is going to be on winning the ball back quickly, go to goal, vertical passes, and look to score early. So, look, Karan, thank you so much for joining me today. It was absolutely fantastic. I could talk to you forever about Rangnick and Red Bull, and we'll have to get you back on. So hopefully we can do that very, very soon. But where can all the listeners find your work? We're going to put your book in the link below as well. Are there any other exciting projects that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. My handle is @Karan_Tejwani26. You can find my books on all major book retailers, whether that's Amazon or Book Depository or Waterstones. My first book was about Red Bull, very closely linked to Rangnick. It was called Wings of Change, and all the Red Bull work in football over the last 15 odd years. And my second book is out next March in 2022. It's called Glorious Reinvention. It's about Ajax, and there's a bit about Erik Ten Hag and his recent success. So if that move ever turns out to happen, I think it would be a fine resource to have. So so you can find all my work.
If that move ever happens, we will definitely be getting you back on and we'll have a discussion. Thank you very much, Karan. As always, guys, give myself a follow at Haider_Rubbani and give us a follow on @TF Masterclass as well to keep up to date with all of our content. Give a like and subscribe. Check out the Rangnick video I did with Rob as well. That was fantastic. We had some great feedback on that. Thank you very much for joining me, and we'll see you all next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.